Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who might be new, my name is Dr. Bundi. I make videos on mental health and on mental well-being and wellness in general. For those of you guys who are coming back, thank you so much for being loyal, for liking, for sharing, and for subscribing. So today I wanted to make a video talking about boundaries and what boundaries are. At the end of this video, I wanted you guys to know that it's okay to say no in some certain situations, how to learn to say no without being guilty, and also how to open up to people, because sometimes we set boundaries that are so fixed, that are so rigid, until it gets to the point where you're not letting people in. It's hard for you to let other people in. Yeah, so I think we all know the story where you open up to someone. It could be a romantic relationship, it could be a friendship, it could be really just anything, yeah, any kind of relationship that is. So you open up to someone, and then for one reason or another you end up getting hurt, right? So at the end of that situation, you get to the point where you're like, now I've learned my lesson, I'm not going to let people in so easily. And then like you create a boundary, which is fine, because like at the end of the day, boundaries are there to protect us, to make us feel safe, and to keep us feeling like we are protecting ourselves. But then let's say, for example, that happens again and again and again, and now your boundaries and your walls keep getting higher and higher and higher. What ends up happening is you get to the point where it's so hard for you to let people in. You get to the point where you are now living alone inside this big fort or castle that you built, and that's not the way to live, yeah. And so I wanted to just kind of mention the three types of boundaries, that people create. So we've got healthy boundaries, porous boundaries, and then we've got rigid boundaries. So that first situation that I've just described to you guys, where you become so it becomes so hard for you to let people in, that's now a rigid boundary. So how else does a rigid boundary look like? Someone who has rigid boundaries avoids intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I don't mean sex. Intimacy is where you actually become vulnerable. You let somebody in, you let them in on, for example, your weaknesses, things that embarrass you. Intimacy is where you actually open up that which is not physical. Somebody who has rigid boundaries, you'll find they struggle with intimacy. They also they find it really difficult to ask for help. Have you ever met somebody who, like, you can see they're struggling, you can see that this person is struggling, and then they have a lot of people around them who they can get support from, but then they just can't seem to ask. And it's not that the people around them are unwilling, because yeah, that happens sometimes, but these people just don't want to ask for help. That's somebody with a rigid boundary. Perhaps in their past they asked for help and they ended up being shamed for it, or they ended up being made to feel bad for asking for help. So that's another way you can see somebody who has rigid boundaries. The other thing is that people with rigid boundaries, they seem to protect their information a bit too much. You know, like somebody, you can be friends with somebody for such a long time, you don't even know, for example, like something simple like where they went to high school, or who is their first boyfriend, you know. So have you ever sat back and thought about somebody and you realize, I actually don't know much about this person? Like, so that's an example of somebody with rigid boundaries. So now let's move to like the opposite end of the spectrum. People who have porous boundaries. Now, something porous is something that lets so much in. So somebody who has porous boundaries is also unhealthy, because they will have, for example, oversharing of personal information. And this tends to happen, for example, people who overly share about their romantic relationships. like they're busy telling you every single thing about their sex life or about their partner. You know, they're telling you, like for example, if your partner tells you something really deep and something that you shouldn't really be saying, then you run off to your friends and you tell them, oh, imagine my boyfriend ABCD. You know, that's I think it's healthy to share, but then there's some things you just should not be sharing. You know what I mean? So that's an example of a porous boundary. So I'll give you guys another example of a porous boundary, and this one is where you see people who are overly invested in other people's problems. They're the sort of person who has their head and their hand in everybody's business, and in a way that's uninvited. Nobody invited you into their situation, but you're there. Oh, are you talking with your boyfriend? How is your friendship with so and so? How are but there's, I know when I'm saying it right now, it might seem like that's just perhaps somebody who's concerned, but then when you think about it, it's not supposed to be in an extreme way where like you're really in people's business and you almost kind of get offended when people are not are putting up a boundary. I think when I'm giving these examples, just think in the extreme form of it, because it can seem really innocent. It can seem like somebody who's just checking up on you, but I'm talking about like in a very extreme way. One more way you can have a porous boundary is if you depend on other people's opinions so heavily. Like before you think of having a career change, you have to run it by everybody, and if somebody tells you, I don't think that business is a good idea, you're there like discarding your whole business idea. You are heavily dependent on people's opinions to the extent that it's starting out to dictate on your own life. That's a porous boundary. So lastly, so now let's talk about how does a healthy boundary look like. A healthy boundary is kind of an in-between between the two things that we've been talking about, and this is where I want you guys to be. If you found yourself leaning towards the rigid or the porous boundary, let me now describe to you what a healthy boundary looks like. A healthy boundary is whereby you're able to share your personal information with people, but up to the extent which is just enough where you don't bare your whole soul to everybody. So number one, you kind of like know who to share what with. For example, with your boss, you're not going to start talking about your personal relationship. You get what I mean? So you know who to share what with and to what extent to share. Something else about a healthy boundary is that you're able to accept when other people tell you no. And this one is like so important, because if you're the sort of person who, when somebody tells you no, I don't want to tell you this about my personal life, you're getting upset. Yeah? Or if somebody tells you, I really don't feel like talking about my family problems with you, you're pissed, you're starting to feel like, if you accept other people's no's, that's a healthy boundary. And lastly, and this one is actually supposed to be the most important one, is whereby you don't compromise your own values for others. Because people without boundaries will do anything for other people. They'll do anything. But you see, if you know your own values, that's the beginning of how to set boundaries. To you, you know, trust is important to me. So my boundary is I cannot be somebody who lies. So that, you see, that starts off, it sets you off with your boundaries, such that if somebody lies to you, then you're like, okay, hold up, no, this, you've crossed a boundary, why are you lying to me? You get me? So basically that's kind of like what healthy boundaries look like. But I wanted to mention just before I wrap this up, you can have different types of boundaries, and it all depends on the setting. Yeah, I'd mentioned earlier that you can have boundaries at work that are very rigid, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because you see, you're at work. At work, you're not expected to really be sharing your personal info with everybody, because that's not what your relationship is all about. Yeah, so you can have rigid boundaries at work, but like with your friendships, with your romantic relationships, you have healthy boundaries. So really it starts with the whole point is just to assess all your boundaries in different settings, and there are different settings for boundaries. So we've said friendships, we've said romantic relationships, career or workplace boundaries, we have sexual boundaries. So when I'm saying that you take stock of your boundaries, check them in all aspects of your lives and in the different setups. It doesn't mean if you have porous boundaries at work, you have porous boundaries everywhere else. I really hope that makes sense to you guys. And so I just wanted to encourage you guys so that we feel like, because probably somebody somewhere sitting feeling like, why can't I say no? And I think sometimes we can't say no because we don't know what our boundaries are. So I just wanted to encourage you guys out there. It's okay to have boundaries. They're there to protect you. Assess and see what works for you really. And once you come from that place, then you start to protect your energy, you start to protect your space. I hope this video has been helpful and informative to you guys. Let me know. I really appreciate your feedback if you have had any experience with boundaries, because I feel like actually for me, the reason why I wanted to talk about boundaries is because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine actually, and she doesn't know this, but she always drops some gems that leave me thinking like, oh my gosh. So this is somebody who I started relating with recently. We were not close, so we started being close, and you guys know how hard it is to make adult friendships. Like, it's difficult. So in the process of getting to know this person realized and pointed out to me that you seem so distant, you seem so cold, like I'm trying to access you but you're always like holding back. And I didn't realize it, but what she was saying was true. Like, I've gotten to the point where I'm so guarded, I've built walls that are so high, it's even so hard to let anybody in. And I'm so glad she pointed it out to me, because for me it was coming from the point of I've been hurt before, so you stay there, don't come closer, you know. And I'm learning slowly to let people in a little bit more, because now I've realized that my boundaries were maybe a little bit too rigid. And I want to move closer to having healthy boundaries. I want to learn, because that's the only way you get to enjoy relationships and you get to enjoy friendships. And I love people, and so I want to get out of this place where everybody's bad, everybody's out to hurt me. I need to protect myself. I need to move from that mindset to the mindset of, okay, not everybody's bad, some people are good, some people deserve my friendship, and some people deserve access to you. Yeah, so that's the end of my video for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's opened up something for you. I've really missed our sit down videos. So yeah, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.